Today we're going to talk about caregiving and how it is a journey of grace and healing. Sometimes we are the one giving the care, and sometimes we become the one unable to care for ourselves. I wrote this in a fanzine called Star Trek Quarterly in spring of 2023, and the essay itself is called Caregiving, a Journey of Grace and Healing. And of course it's a Star Trek fanzine. So Star Trek's amazing. Star Trek is about infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And being a person with disabilities who also has endometriosis, I fit that definition pretty well. So I like to talk about it whenever I can. But why caregiving? What possible reason could I have to talk about caregiving? Who is the ultimate caregiver? Who committed the ultimate act of caregiving? Jesus Christ committed the ultimate act of care on Good Friday. He helped the world in a way that nobody else can match. He suffered. He gave his life for the world that we might be free to see our lives as valuable and build our lives the way we want them, and to see beyond our brokenness and to move beyond it, that we might be free to find joy in ourselves even as we are. Even despite our struggles, even despite the problems that we have, even despite the fact that we are unable to care for ourselves a lot of the time, we can live our lives with joy. We can see beyond our brokenness and see that we are people of infinite worth, that we are works and glories of God. And we can stop being a mess and focus on the fact that we are miracles. As it says in this essay, when someone becomes unable to care for themselves, the natural instinct is to want to care for them. You know, Christ came upon us and he said, hey, all these people here are unable to care for themselves, and it's been that way since the days of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve fell pretty quickly. They struggled pretty quickly. They ate fruit that they weren't supposed to eat, and hence they showed their struggle. And so this plan came into effect that would involve an innocent giving themselves so that the world wouldn't forever be bound to this act of disobedience. It was necessary for progression, but it was still an act of disobedience. And so Christ took it upon himself to care for those who were unable to care for themselves because they were bound by the weight of disobedience. They were unable to lift themselves from that weight. Christ cared for those who were unable to care for themselves. But many generations resigned themselves to living in their pain and gave God a lot of grief for trying to care and love them. And this happened for many generations, despite the fact that God sent people to care about these broken generations. And then eventually Christ came and lifted this weight from people. Christ endured pure hell and allowed himself to endure this so that others could be free from the weight that came unto the world in the beginning. So we are free to find good in our broken, imperfect, flawed selves. And we are free to build on the good that we have in ourselves. We are free to find grace and move on from our brokenness and find joy in who we are and whose we are. We are children of God. We are unable to care for ourselves, but we don't have to remain unable to care for ourselves. We can embrace the grace that Christ offers us through his atonement. And we can allow ourselves to be cared for and freed from our brokenness. But there are those who hate themselves for who they are, who truly need the help of caregivers. Some like Garak from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. In the episode of Deep Space Nine called The Wire, he truly hated himself and he was suffering greatly. He had a problem that he carried with him that none knew of, and it began to affect his ability to live and thrive. But yet he felt that he was unworthy to ask for help. And fortunately for him, he had a friend named Dr. Julian Bashir, who saw him as worthy of friends, worthy of love, worthy of compassion, even when he was at his very worst. I suppose in a way Julian was like Jesus. He saw Garak at his worst and said, hey, here is an individual who was at his worst, and yet I still see him as an individual who is worthy of love and compassion. And I am going to lift him where he stands and care for him as he is and love him as he is and care for him and overlook his imperfections and help him through his struggles. Caring for someone as they struggle with any type of illness is not easy, especially when the outcome is not certain. But you know what? If we just love people unconditionally, we shall be given the strength to love unconditionally, because truly loving people without conditions, it's not easy because we have such a limited scope. But if we see others as Christ sees us and truly commit to that, we shall be given what we need through the atonement of Jesus Christ. We shall be given the grace and the strength to see and approach and treat others as Christ does us. And we shall be given the Spirit of God that we might be able to do and be what we are needed to do and be, that we might become what we are needed, that we might serve as an effective instrument in the Lord's hands. If we just turn away from our natural instinct to run away from what we're uncomfortable with and be as Christ, then we shall be given what we need to be a help to those in need. We are all designed to be a support unto one another. And if we are willing to be a support to one another, we shall be given what we need that we might live up to be the measure of our creation. It should be our work and glory to help bring to pass the life of others, as it is God's work and glory to bring to pass our life. The worth of our soul is great in the sight of God, and the worth of others' soul should be great in our sight. But it is truly not easy to care for others, especially when our opinion of them might not be as kind, and especially when they don't treat us as well as we feel we deserve to be treated. And it is especially hard to be a caregiver unto others when they are abusive unto us. But it's not impossible. Jesus Christ was a caregiver and a lover and a giver of compassion and grace and mercy unto those who killed him and abused him. And likewise, we can do the same to those who harm us. And I say this because I've had experiences with that. I myself was a caregiver to my father, John Robert Cameron Sr., when he was suffering and passing from cancer in 2014. He and I did not get along when he was alive because he deemed me as a person difficult to be around, and he deemed me as unworthy of love because I am neurodivergent. He didn't love me because of my disabilities. He stopped loving me when I was 3 years old and I was first diagnosed. And it just got hard to be around him. You know, it's quite sad. He didn't see my value, but I saw the value in trying to love him as Jesus loved him when he was dying, because I didn't want regrets. Because I knew he was going to pass away, and I didn't want the regret of failing to love him when he was at his lowest point. I truly struggled to find joy in being in his presence, though, because he was very abusive while under the influence of alcohol. But as I came to learn after seeking help in dealing with my own pain, alcoholism is very much a sickness and an addiction, and so I don't have lasting hate for him. It's truly impossible to hate someone who is so sick that they have lost the ability to be their authentic selves. And that brings me back to Garak. That truly brings me back to Garak. In the episode The Wire, Garak became so sick with his affliction that he lost the ability to be his authentic self. And he became abusive to Julian, his friend, the one who looked upon him with compassion. But sometimes, that's like us and Jesus. Sometimes we become so wrapped up in our struggles that we become abusive to Christ despite his compassion. Even when Christ was in his ministry, people became so wrapped up in their own struggles that they became abusive to Christ, even though he looked upon them with love. Fortunately, Julian had a Christ-like attitude when it came to Garak, and he looked upon Garak with compassion. Julian was smart enough to realize that the abusive behavior was unnatural coming from the Garak that he knew. He knew that it wasn't natural for Garak to be hateful or mean. Snarky, maybe. But he knew that Garak wasn't an angry individual. He knew that Garak wasn't mean. He knew that Garak didn't just lose his head and be hateful. He knew Garak to be better than he was acting, because Garak was being angry and hateful and sad and acting in a way that he didn't normally act. And Julian, instead of walking away, just looked upon him with compassion and gentleness, much like Christ does unto us when we behave unnaturally. He looks upon us with compassion, and he says, "Oh, I still love you. You're having a bad day. I still love you. I'm not going to abandon you just because you're having a bad day." He struggled to find joy in Garak's presence while Garak was sick, because Garak took a lot of his anger out on Julian, but Julian did not give up on his friend. Julian was there. Julian was present. He still expressed love for Garak. Julian also did not lash out at Garak or carry any lasting hate for him. What was the point? He knew that there would eventually be an end to Garak's sickness, and so he didn't want to express any words or actions that would leave scars. Because what was the point of expressing any behaviors that would leave scars? Hate, anything said in hate, anything done in hate would leave scars. And hate only cripples a heart and renders it incapable of giving and receiving love. There is no point in expressing hate for angry behavior that only lasts but a small moment. And caregiving is a complicated journey. Caregiving is truly a complicated journey. Like, there may be times where you want to express hate as a caregiver because the one you're caring for doesn't show any loving behavior towards you. But what is the point of being hateful as a caregiver? What is the point of expressing behavior that you can't take back? It would have been so easy for me to hate my father because he was abusive even as I was caring for him. But I would have had to live with it. He was dying. He wouldn't have had to live with it. I would have had to live with what I said or did that was hateful. And so there was really no point. It's complicated. And it's all too easy to hate an abuser. But to see an abuser with love is even more challenging. But to see an abuser with love and forgiveness, it helps one grow and realize that healing is possible. To forever become trapped in hate, it changes one's character to the point where they might become an abuser themselves. And one should really focus on the healing aspect of such a journey. And I mean, when an abuser dies, it is like getting out of prison only if you are willing to let the feelings of pain go. If you express hate for your abuser and relief that he is dead and celebrate that he is dead instead of expressing sorrow and giving forgiveness, then you are just basically saying you want to stay in prison even though your sentence is done. When an abuser dies, those who have been abused are free to move on and heal from the wounds caused. But if they want to hang on to the hate, they are basically saying they want to keep the wounds and stay in the prison. And one shouldn't want to stay in prison. One should want to be free once abuse ends. Because it's not a happy place to be in. It's not a happy way to live. Truly, there is no point in hanging on to pain when an abuser is dead or dying. Because the provider of pain is no longer there, so you are the only one feeding that with your inability and unwillingness to let go of your hate. Caregiving, someone who is dying that has hurt you, it allows you to be able to let go of that hate and show them compassion so you don't get left with any regrets. Caregiving can be a process of healing. You can truly see that you have nothing to be afraid of anymore except your own unwillingness to heal, and just let that person slowly succumb in peace and find joy in the fact that your suffering will also be over and that you can move on. It's a process of healing, discovery, acceptance, refinement, and personal liberation. You don't have to hang on to hate. You can also care for yourself in that you can let go. Like caring for my father allowed me to realize, hey, he is going to be gone. I don't have to hang on to the hate because he is going to be gone. So what's the point of hating him? I can just allow myself to show him and myself grace and not be angry and just be peaceful about this. Because what is, he's going. I don't have to imprison myself in hate and just be angry. I can be peaceful and not add to his pain or keep my own from allowing me to be a Christ-like caregiver. That attitude of wanting to be a Christ-like caregiver allowed me to find healing in my journey. Of course, I did not excuse his bad behaviors. I was quite upfront in the fact that I did not allow him to escape responsibility for any of the bad behaviors that he committed while under my caregiving watch. But I did forgive his bad behaviors because what was the point of being angry about them? I just simply chose to focus on helping him be able to find peace as much as he was capable of finding it, because he had a lot of regrets. But those weren't my responsibility. My responsibility was helping him to be comfortable where and when I could. And you know, that is also what Christ does. His responsibility is helping us to embrace the atonement where and when we can. He's provided us with the atonement, and he invites us to utilize it where and when we can, and he helps us to utilize it however we are comfortable utilizing it. And he helps us to see our value and our right to utilize it, and he just sits with us and helps us to be able to find and realize our worthiness to embrace it. And wherever my dad is now, I'm sure he is working on embracing his peace. I'm pretty sure he's with Jesus and he has conversations with Jesus every day. Is a bit of a freeing experience for him in that he struggles with his feelings, but he doesn't have sicknesses weighing him down anymore. Sickness truly is a barrier, because sickness can evoke all sorts of feelings that can really dominate a person's ability to focus on their goodness. He struggles with his feelings, but he doesn't have sicknesses weighing him down anymore. Sickness truly is a barrier, because sickness can evoke all sorts of feelings that can really dominate a person's ability to focus on their goodness. And Garak, he struggled with his sickness to the point where he wasn't able to focus on his goodness, and hence he needed support. He needed compassion. And hence why it was beneficial for him to have a friend. Why it was beneficial for him to have Julian. If any of you have seen Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Julian Bashir was notorious for not minding his own business. And he intruded on Garak's personal life the moment he noticed that something was wrong. He absolutely broke in on Garak's personal space and personal life, you know. He showed true love and true care for a friend. He helped Garak to make peace with himself and helped Garak to realize, hey, you are worth this love and care. Please take it. Please accept that you are worthy of life. And Garak eventually did. And he enjoyed the fact that somebody cared for him. We are beings of worth to God in Christ. We can take that with us wherever we go. And, that's probably something my father was pleased with, even as he passed away. Because I was there at his side when he passed away on October 26, 2014, because I had just brought my mother dinner and I had noticed the change in his breathing, and I mentioned it, and I was right there when he passed. And my presence, I'm hopeful, told my father that I cared and that I loved him, and I am hopeful that he knew I cared, and presence hopefully sent the message that I cared. And Christ constantly is there. His presence, he hopes, is enough for us that we might know he cares. He doesn't act upon us. He just simply is there in hopes that we see him and invite him to be an active part of our lives. He stands at the door to our heart. He cannot actively come in because there is no entrance. We have to let him in. And he wants to be invited in, that we might benefit from being lifted where we stand and embraced and given grace and strength to see that we are beings of worth, and that we are works and glories of God that are just more than small and simple beings. We are all struggling with afflictions, and we are all in need of the healing balm that is the atonement. We are all afflicted with something. We are truly all afflicted with something. But we have the ability to access the help of the ultimate caregiver. Everybody's illnesses start out with a simple symptom. Like my father, his illness started out simple. It was a symptom. He actually had an incident with a weed whacker and afflicted his leg with a weed whacker, and he ended up in the hospital getting treated for that, and then they found something weird in his blood and just snowballed from there. And it ended up being cancer. And then from there it went to stage 4 cancer of the adrenal gland. And Garak, he had headaches. And then he had a seizure, and then he had an implant in his brain, and it was quite scary. And we are all broken people with various spiritual needs. And Christ notices these things, and he invites us to notice these things for ourselves. That we might seek help and realize that we are of infinite worth and worthy of the love and the care that the atonement can provide us. As I think back to my mother. She described my father's illness, the very diagnosis of it. She described that diagnosis as a game changer for our family. When my father was officially diagnosed with cancer, back in July of 2014, she described that as a game changer, and it really was. Because our family was going to change permanently, especially when it came to light that it was stage 4 and there was nothing that could be done. And like, he responded by saying, I'm gonna die anyway. And he went to drinking and other bad things to cope with his pain. And he had just spent some time in rehab, and he was trying to get a new job after losing his job. But I do feel that he was on a bad path, because I feel very strongly that had he taken the job that he had actually secured, he might have gone back to the pattern that he had been in for so many years. And so maybe this was God's way of just kind of stopping him from slipping into another destructive pattern. And the relationship we had as a family was already unstable, because he had suffered from alcoholism for so many years, and the behavior connected to it, the behavior he had unleashed, had already caused much hurt to the family. But the cancer and the terminality of it suddenly meant that there would be a definite end to that hurt. And that brought forth an invitation to us to let go of our hurt and pain and just focus on being good caregivers. We were invited by God to let go of our pain and our hurt and focus on being what my dad clearly needed to be able to get through his final months. It truly was not easy, especially given the fact that he ran straight back to drinking and straight to abusive behavior connected to drinking. It really wasn't easy, but you know, when you connect with God to get you through a troubling experience, he can give you the grace to be able to see the struggling as Jesus does. And he can give you the ability to be as Jesus needs you to be, and he can give you the grace to respond to others with kindness and grace and focus on being an instrument in the Lord's hands and be what is best for the situation, even if the situation and those in it aren't kind to you. It truly wasn't about me. It was truly about being a caregiver. It was truly about being a Christ-like caregiver. Well, that makes me think of Julian and Garak. Julian and Garak knew relatively little about each other, and Garak didn't approach Julian unless he needed something, but when Garak got sick, Julian suddenly became Garak's best friend, and Julian put himself aside and went to work caring. Like, Julian had a heck of a time fitting into the world in which he lived because of his neurodivergent behaviors and the fight it was to hide his augmentations from the world. And Garak hid in the comfort of his lives, mysterious past, and his tailor's life. The chaos of illness brought them together and taught them how to be better than they were. My father's illness taught me how to be better than I was. It helped me to stop being a hateful person and to look upon the suffering with love. And to look upon my father with the eyes of Christ. It was truly a game changer in that it allowed me to let go of who I was. And it refused to let me go back to who I was. Like, I used to be so wrapped up in my pain that I would just look at my father and say, oh God, how much longer do I have to suffer in this madness? Like, before he got sick, I had just finished a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In April, I had suddenly realized that I was meant to go back to my family home, and I didn't want to. I truly didn't want to. I wanted to just stay on my own and do great things, but I just felt like I should go home. I prayed for God to give me any other way. But the prompting was strong, and so I did. I went home, and then it was very bad. From April to July, it was very toxic, very, very tumultuous and toxic. And by the time July came around, I was ready to leave again. Actually, the day that I had learned of my father's illness, I was ready to leave again and move out and go my own way again, but then the game changer happened. And I decided, oh, I'm needed here. God literally knew I would be needed. And so he allowed me to forget myself and go to work being a Christ-like caregiver and forget the fact that I didn't fit into the world in which I lived. And he allowed me to become more than I was ever expected to be and become the stabilizing force that my family needed in order to get through that tough time. Suddenly, everyone was wanting to become vulnerable with me, and suddenly I found myself gifted with the ability to accept everyone's vulnerabilities. And I felt myself fortified by the Spirit of God. I was suddenly the one that was basically carrying the family because Mom was busy caring for Dad. Basically, my brother was doing what he could to cope, and I was the one basically helping everyone. And my strength was coming from God and Christ, and without them, I don't think I could have been strong. It was very much parallel to the game changer in The Wire. When Garak got sick in The Wire, Garak suddenly found that he was having to be vulnerable with someone, and that someone was Julian. And their current relationship, or their lack thereof, shattered and was instantly reborn on a basis of vulnerability, love, and care where they each had a clear role. But even getting to that point was a battle because Garak wanted to hang on to what was. And Julian just didn't know how to help someone who didn't want to be helped, but they each overcame their natural selves and their fears and just simply fell into what was given to them. Just like I fell into what was given to me. I engaged in the role of a caregiver to my father and a caregiver to my family. Like, engaging in the role of a caregiver to someone who is sick with a terminal disease is nothing less than a battle. Like, there's a lot of sacrifice involved. It's never easy to accept that someone is sick. It wasn't easy to accept that my father had cancer. It was not easy for Julian to accept that Garak was sick. And then, later on, when my father found out that his cancer was absolutely terminal, that nothing could be done, I suddenly found myself sitting on our deck and making a video that had him saying he didn't want extraordinary measures. Like, you never imagine that you have to do that, because that means accepting that they're going to die. And you never want to accept that about your parents, that they have an end. Like, my father, he was literally a truck driver. He worked in oil fields in Canada and England and Iran and Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi. And then here he is, vulnerable, sitting in hospital beds, just sitting on the deck, just going to die. And it's very hard for him to accept this, just realizing, oh, he has an end. And likewise, it wasn't easy for my family to just look at this and realize, oh goodness, this terrible situation is happening. And as we look at the Deep Space Nine episode, The Wire, Julian, he wasn't used to seeing Garak so vulnerable. But you know how Julian is. At least those who have seen Star Trek understand. Julian just simply slipped into the role of kind, loving, albeit quirky, caregiver. He sat at Garak's bedside and tended to him endlessly and obsessively. And he loved and cared. I mean, Garak tried to scare Julian away with his behaviors and the wild tales. But, you know, Julian can reasonably be put in the role of Christ, in that he stayed, just like Christ stays. Christ stays unconditionally. Christ loves us. He cares for us. His love and presence are unconditional as long as we want it in our lives. Julian's unconditional love for Garak, his love for the unique connection that he and Garak shared, Julian's healer's oath, and his want to help alleviate Garak's endless suffering all kept him at the Cardassian side, you know? This is much like how Christ sees us. Christ sees us with unconditional love. Christ has a love for the unique connection that he shares with us. Christ has had an oath to heal us ever since he volunteered to atone for us. And Christ constantly wants to help alleviate our endless suffering. Hence his constant want to offer us the atonement. And his constant want to stay at our side. He constantly does stay at our side. He truly stays at our side. More often than not, we don't make things easy for Christ. We don't. Just like my father and Garak didn't make things easy for their caregivers. Both Garak and my father were not kind or grateful about the care they received. And really, you know, when Christ cares for us, sometimes, more often than not, we're not grateful about the care we receive either. My father and Garak were abusive to their caregivers, and they were confused about why others cared for them. They were confused because they had been abusive to their caregivers, and yet their caregivers looked at them and treated them with love. You know, even Christ stays when we are not so kind about him or to him. But that's the nature of unconditional love. Even when we are not kind about Christ or to Christ, Christ stays with us, because love, at least in the eyes of Christ, it is unconditional and long-suffering. And you know, even when those who suffer engage in substance abuse. Love is still very much a thing. Like, my father engaged in substance abuse during his dying days. As I've mentioned, he did it in an attempt to alleviate his intense pain, his physical pain, his emotional pain. Garak attempted it in order to alleviate his suffering, and yet my family stood by my father's side. Christ does not give up on us when we behave in inappropriate manners. And Julian did not give up on Garak when Garak engaged in substance abuse. And the substance abuse did absolutely nothing except to intensify their negative feelings regarding their illnesses and accelerate the deterioration of their bodies and minds. And it also magnified their agony. But, part of seeing the suffering with Christ's eyes is seeing all of these behaviors with love. My father and Garak were both fortunate that their caregivers weren't judgmental about their actions, about their substance abuse, and simply worked to find a better remedy for their suffering. Like Christ isn't judgmental when we suffer and work to address it in ways that aren't good for us. He simply invites us to find a better way to deal with our suffering. He doesn't give up on us, and we shouldn't give up on each other when it comes to suffering. We are all made to help each other, and Christ was made to help us. The atonement allows us to see others as Christ does, worthy of help, worthy of love, worthy of compassion. It is not easy to find solutions to suffering. There was no ultimate solution when it came to my father. We knew what was going to happen, and all we could do was just bring him small comforts. So that's what we did. But Garak's wasn't permanent, even though they thought it to be. Even when things are permanent, though, we should find joy in the time that we have with our loved ones. And we should find pure opportunity in the fact that we can be caregivers like Christ. Our presence, even in a terminal situation, is absolutely essential so that suffering doesn't have to increase. Life is so very short, and our presence can make it meaningful. Christ's presence in everyone's lives can make it meaningful. Christ only lived 33 years before he was called on a different journey. But those 33 years were absolutely essential. His ministry was only... Like when my father was sick, I took the time to see my father as he was, a person in need of love and support. I didn't just see the cancer, I saw my father. I knew it was not going to be easy to see him as a person worthy of love and support because he had abused me in the past. But if I hung on to the hate, I was going to imprison myself in hate and not allow the Spirit of Christ to help me to be able to see the opportunity that was there to be an instrument in the Lord's hands. so I needed to let go of my hate so that I wouldn't deny myself the opportunity to be an instrument in the Lord's hands. I mean, Christ died for me too, so that I could let go of my hate. And so I allowed the atonement to bless me with the strength and the grace to let go of my hate. And so I allowed myself to become a caregiver. I allowed Christ to care for me and to bless me with the strength to see my father as a person worthy of love. It was definitely stepping out of my comfort zone, but I was behaving like Christ in doing so. Christ was always stepping out of his comfort zone to see people as people. And that's why he was able to atone as he did. He stepped out of his comfort zone and saw everybody as worthy of love and rescue and grace. And in order to be an effective caregiver, that's what we need to do sometimes. We need to step out of our comfort zone and see everybody as worthy of love and grace. There was no point in losing my temper or leaving my father helpless. He needed care. He was a person in need of care and grace and compassion. So I chose to forgive in that moment and continually until he died and even after he died. And after, it did feel like I got out of jail after a long sentence. After he died, I needed time to rebuild myself. But spitting words of hate at a dying man, that would just leave me full of really, really a lot of pain after he was gone. There was no point in being hateful to one in need of compassion, because that would only leave me with regret. I needed to see him with more compassion than I was humanly capable of. That's why I relied on Jesus Christ. Christ magnified my efforts to see my Father the way he needed to be seen, the way he needed to be heard, the way he needed to be treated. Like, people expected me to hate him. People expected me to celebrate his death. But there's no glory in celebrating the death of someone who's already dying. There's no glory in celebrating the death of someone who's suffering. Like, I am not going to minimize what he was. He literally got so verbally violent in August of 2014 that legal intervention was required, and I gave a witness to the police because I was present for the violence, and he got treatment for that in psych, as I mentioned, but he died eventually on October 26, 2014, and I spoke at his funeral on October 30th, 2014. And there was a time where I wondered if I could have been better at caregiving. And I wondered if I had truly allowed the Lord to magnify my efforts and my desire enough. Or had I allowed the stress of the situation, unresolved feelings, cloud my ability to give what I could? Had I given enough of my time, my efforts, my widow's mites? I don't know. I even cared for him after he was gone, to the point where I spread his ashes. I took his ashes to one of his favorite spots and I spread them. After I gave him a little video message, I spread his ashes, and I've written things about him since. And I suppose I have been respectful. You know, Christ has truly magnified my efforts in that I've been able to talk about him since, with respect. Christ is capable of helping us to see beyond our natural selves. Christ is capable of helping us to give ourselves grace even when we don't think we are enough. Christ is truly the ultimate caregiver. I mean, we look upon ourselves and our realities, and we don't give ourselves grace, but we should. The atonement of Jesus Christ allows us to give ourselves grace, but we don't do it. We don't think we're good enough. But the worth of our souls is great in the sight of God, as we are. And it is God's work and glory to bring to pass our life as we are. And we lack that wisdom, but why aren't we asking of God how we can gain that wisdom of our self-worth? Jesus Christ, as he passed, he looked up to the Father and said, "It is finished," and he gave up the ghost. And even as he was up there, he asked the Father to forgive them, for they know not what they do. Christ wants us to forgive ourselves, for we know not what we do, and that we are failing to love ourselves as we are. Christ's atonement can help us. You know, caregiving involves caring for ourselves as much as it involves caring for others. I was able to look past the criticisms of my father and see who he really was and give him grace. But am I able to look past the criticisms of others and see who I really am and give myself grace? Caregiving is a choice that involves work and sacrifice and embracing the idea that we are truly relieving the suffering of others, and embracing the idea that we are truly relieving our own suffering. It's a choice that we make to love ourselves as we are. It's a choice we make to allow Christ to lift us where we stand and give us grace and love and relief. The atonement of Jesus Christ applies to us too. Are we really respecting the whole notion of Good Friday if we don't partake for us? Are we looking up to the cross and realizing that Jesus died for us too? Or are we just giving that to everybody else and leaving ourselves no grace? We cannot and should not be afraid to admit that we are powerless over ourselves and that we need Christ's atonement to be rescued from our vulnerable moments and look past our pain and move past it and focus on receiving healing for ourselves. We need to choose to move past our pain. We are worthy to move past our pain. We are able and have the right to move past our pain. If we are just focused on being trapped in our pain, we are never going to heal. If we're just focused on giving care to everybody else and give no care to ourselves, we will never be better. We can use pain given to us from others not only to be caregivers to others, but also caregivers to ourselves. And we can allow Christ to care for us and magnify us. That healing grace given to us by Christ can truly help us to become our best selves. Christ gave his life that we might be magnified beyond our pain. Forgiveness and giving grace and permission unto ourselves frees us from pain and allows us to be healed by the loving act that the atonement is. And I truly say unto you, Remember, the worth of all souls is great in the sight of God. All, including our own.